Shwmae a chroeso I Sgwrs, podlediad Consortiwm Canolbarth y De. Yn y podlediad hwn byddwch chi'n clywed y trafodaethau diweddara am bob math o bethau addysg. Hello and welcome to Sgwrs, the Central South Consortium podcast. In this podcast we'll bring you the very latest discussions on all things education.
Croeso mawr I Sgwrs. We're joined today by Amy, who's deputy at Pencoedtre High School, and Liz, who's acting deputy at Romilly Primary School, both schools in Barry, the Vale of Glamorgan. They're going to tell us about how they've been leading effective teaching and learning in their schools through a collaborative professional learning and coaching programme. We'll hear of the rationale for this collaboration, we'll explore how it has evolved since 2023, and most importantly, they will share the benefits of the collaborative approach on staff, pupils, and the wider community. So, croeso mawr, welcome to Sgwrs, Amy and Liz. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Hello.
Hello. Even though we're not here together in person, it's a virtual together, isn't it? So I think it'd be really helpful if you'd start us off by just telling us a little bit more about yourselves, about your schools and your role in your schools. So should we start with Amy?
So I'm Amy. I work at Whitmore High and at Pencoedtre, where I've just been made deputy.
Congratulations.
And I lead. Oh, thank you. I lead on professional learning and teaching learning, and coaching is my big love, if you like, and also working with transition and working with Liz through professional learning. So that's how we've been working through coaching.
Hi, I'm Liz. I'm the acting teacher at deputy at Romilly. We're quite a large primary school. We're 3-form entry. We have about 750 children. The majority of our children go to Whitmore High School, about 86%. So that's why we were very keen to collaborate. We started working together on different things. Relationships blossomed. Our thinking was aligned and we jumped right in.
Oh, that's lovely. Right. So what we want to know is what that jumping right in sort of looks like. And hopefully throughout this podcast, we can unpick that a little. So could you tell us a little bit more about how that collaboration started?
Amy and Kelly were offering professional learning streams in our cluster. So many of our staff went on these professional learning programs, whether or not it was improving teaching and learning, aspiring TLR or aspiring SLT. And it was the feedback from that enabled us to start thinking bigger picture. It was the buy-in from the staff of what was going on at Whitmore and what these ladies were delivering meant that it was of high quality.
It was because we were delivering the professional learning streams that the staff from Romilly trusted what we were talking about when it came to teaching and learning. So we were able to show our teaching and learning through the professional learning, if that makes sense. And because of that, then we were able to introduce the staff to the Whitmore way of learning, which was the I do, we do, you do. And we hung our professional learning on that. So we looked at the pedagogical principles that sat behind that, looking at the direct teaching method. And we looked at leadership of how to embed the we do, you do method and how that actually works within teaching and learning, and how you can shift and embed teaching and learning within whole school practices, and how coaching sits along that, and how you can improve teaching and learning within your school through coaching principles. And then when I spoke to Liz was saying, well, your teaching and learning principles didn't sit very far from that schools, did it?
So we had our own model, but perhaps it was a little bit, and I'm air quoting now, although you can't see it, it was fluffier, but it had all the key elements that the Whitmore High model. And it was one of our teachers who came back and said, why don't we just have their structure, because it's just more efficient and you don't have to worry about the format or the template of the lesson. And because it was coming from the staff, I was like, oh, okay. So when we actually put the Whitmore template and our model next to each other, the philosophy was exactly the same. It was just a tighter structure. So because we had permission from the staff, it was their wish, come on, let's do it. We then thought, okay, let's try it. And then Amy and Kelly offered a little bit of a coaching model about implementing their template in a primary school. And we did it as a trial first for years 5 and 6. They came up to Whitmore to see it live. You did some coaching around it.
I think that was key, actually, was actually getting the primary school teachers up into Whitmore and going and having a learning walk around the school. And that was brilliant, going into classrooms, because for the primary school teachers, they couldn't quite believe the standard of learning and teaching that model achieved. And I remember your teacher saying to us, oh my gosh, everyone's so quiet. And we could never get that. And I challenged teachers, didn't I? And I said, why not? Why can't you get year 5 and 6 working in silence? And they took that back to you, didn't they, Liz?
Absolutely. So when we went up to Whitmore, and I use this in the nicest term, but it was actually quite freaky walking around a secondary school that has over 1,000 children. I don't know how many, and there wasn't any noise, whereas we still are a noisy primary school. And I think it just opened our horizons. What are our aspirations? So things like moving around the school now, we do so much better because we've seen another school doing it so well. But it was definitely our staff going for professional learning, seeing things that they liked, they respected, they saw the benefit in, coming back and discussing, and then myself and Amy and Kelly got on, our thinking was similar, and then we sort of created a bit of a bespoke approach to what works for both of our schools. So we didn't start with an idea, it was completely organic, it merged and it kept refining and growing into something else.
That's really, really helpful to hear all of that. So that if we unpick, so you realise you both had sort of teacher and learning models in your schools, and you realised that there was some alignment within those. Absolutely. You said, Liz, it might have been fluffier, but again, your models will have been age appropriate, wouldn't they, as well? So they will have looked differently. So if we unpick that, so there was something about the Whitmore model that really resonated with your staff, and of course what really resonated was then seeing it in action and seeing the high standards that the pupils at Whitmore were achieving through that model. So for our listeners, can we unpick what that model is and how you develop that Whitmore way in the first place? What is it about the teaching and learning at Whitmore then that is having that impact on standards?
So for us at Romilly, it was the structure, it was the time frame, it was in the first 5 minutes you're doing this and then that moves on to something else. So if you think about a secondary school, most of the lessons are exactly the same length of time, a bell rings and you move on. A beautiful thing about primary is you could have a lesson that's 1 hour, 5 minutes or 3 hours. And we don't want to take that away, but we thought, right, whatever length our lesson is, let's follow the structure of that. Okay. And, we had it before, explicit modelling, have a go, whiteboard work, independent, all those things. It's just more of a permanent template that our staff follow. So for us, it wasn't what we were doing. It was the structure, the tightness, the timing, I suppose the comfort for the children and the staff. This is the order we plan. This is the order we deliver.
And in Whitmore, you found comfort within those routines and the norms that you felt that were well established in Whitmore, and you thought that particularly the older learners at Romilly would benefit from starting to be sort of inducted into those norms and routines. And
strangely, or perfectly, and perhaps that's why it aligned, both models, the Whitmore model and the Romilly model, were backed by research. So we'd all privately gone away and done inquiries on about the most efficient learning styles, cognitive overload, all those sorts of things, modelling, feedback, but we just presented them in a different way. So when we saw Whitmore, it was so similar to what we were doing, it probably just reduced our staff workload because it was more efficient. And that's why we had buy-in. So,
Amy, in terms of then, so what is it about the Whitmore way that is efficient? How did you create that? Because as Liz said, there's lots of versions of these kind of approaches where there's structure, but But how did you get to that point with the Whitmore approach?
I think it's because it's got absolute clarity and approach, and all of the staff buy into it because it's got the impact, and it does make sure that pupils show progress in the class, and it takes away the fear of what we expect as SLT. So when we are conducting learning walks, when we've got quality assurance and performance management, the teachers know exactly what we're looking for. So we've got the do now, then we've got the I do, the we do, the you do, the plenary, and that's exactly what we're looking for. And sitting in each of those sections, we've got the non-negotiables where, for example, the I do is to be conducted in silence, which is what Liz was talking about, and that is what we expect, and that's what teachers will have in their classrooms. And so therefore there's no fear of, oh my gosh, what when we walk into a classroom, what they expect me to look for, it's there, and we're very explicit in that. So that clarity of approach of what we're looking for, and the teachers expect that, and so do the pupils, and that ensures that there is progress and there are standards and there's consistency of approach across the whole of the school, and that's why we achieve the pupil outcomes that we do across the school.
That's really interesting. I was listening to a podcast that Emma and Tom, the PGC podcast, and a recent episode they had done with Kelly, the deputy from Willows High School, and they were talking about a very similar approach there, where they had put in place quite strict structures and commonality, consistency in terms of expectations across all areas of their school, and that it was having huge impact, of course, then on attendance, on behaviour, that pupils felt more safe and secure, that it started to raise their expectations of themselves as well, that if there's a zero tolerance, I suppose, to that. I suppose I'm sure that there will have been, if we look at change management, we look at a curve, there will have been some resistance perhaps to all certain subjects that felt that the routines maybe didn't fit theirs as well. Were there any instances like that you sort of had to overcome?
I think now that I'm in Pencoedtre and just introducing it into a new school, that's really interesting, because we're in Whitmore, we're 5 years into this model, so it's embedded and it's cultural and it's just natural and normal. So actually coming to Pencoedtre and introducing it here and being through those initial stages, it's really interesting. The creative subjects have found it challenging, but actually I challenge them back and say, no, it works, and you can actually do it if you want it to work. And it's making sure that teachers buy into it, and it's once they realise that it's I do, we do absolutely works fundamentally for anything, because it's the natural way in which you teach. It is having that buy-in from staff when they see the impact with pupils and they see that light bulb moment happening, and recognising actually this is just good teaching practice day in, day out. So now we've broken that mindset of change in staff, and they can see the impact in pupils, that no, it's just looking creatively at how it works, and being confident as leaders that this does work in the school, that staff have bought into it in Pencoedtre. It's had a massive impact here in pupils' attitudes in learning, in staff, in their teaching, and their expectations of their pupils, because now they realise, oh my goodness, pupils can achieve, because this is such a simple structure of teaching and learning. Pupils now come in and expect to be taught that way, and behaviour has improved, and it's having, as I said, a massive impact here in Pencoedtre.
So in terms of what are the pupils telling you? I know that self-evaluation is another strength across both of your schools, and we might get to that later, but in terms of then the impact it's having on pupils, what do the pupils themselves tell you about having that structure?
The pupils enjoy the fact that there's chunked learning. It's making it easier to access. The fact that teachers now are recapping, and we introduced pit stops. So pit stops are checking the learning, and they're checking the learning before they move on, whereas before teachers weren't necessarily checking for understanding, they were just simply ploughing on through the lesson, whereas now they're stopping, checking before moving on. And so pupils don't feel lost in that lesson, and that lessons are far more scaffold for their learning.
If you think about all the cognitive science information we have, we're just implementing that. So we're using what good practice is to deliver learning. So even if they don't quite understand it, we're using science to help shape how we teach. So for me, I just think it's just effective and efficient, and it's the right thing to do. When knowledge comes about, you should try and find out about it, trial it, implement it, tweak it.
But we proved it works across 2 schools for
Yes.
all ages. If you're determined to make something happen, it will happen. And just goes to show collaborative working really does work when you're determined.
Yeah. So the first year, last year, we did it with 5 and 6 because we felt they were the closest to year 7. So that would be the easiest. But because we were so happy and impressed with the impact, this year we've done it with 3 and 4 as well. So Key Stage 2 is using the model, and foundation phase uses the Romilly model, which is still very similar to the Whitmore, but not as tight structure because obviously of the foundation phase. But there are still elements that, you know, we've had staff training and everybody's pinching some ideas. So you'll see it in every classroom.
Thinking about the Welsh Government enabling learning guidance and looking at how we can bridge the gap so that we're building from that foundation learning approach of enabling adults, enabling environments, and we're just sort of moving that, building on that, but as you say, at an age appropriate way, but in a way that allows you then to have a teaching and learning model that you feel best serves your learners. So that takes a lot of inquiry, as you said, and research, doesn't it? And self-evaluating the impact it's having. So I suppose none of this remains static. You're always going after, is it still having the impact we want? How do we know? So are there any key changes that you've felt that are fundamental to the success of the model, where the sort of pivot points or times you had to take stock and your self-evaluation, the information that you were gathering was telling you something has to change a little bit, or we've maybe left some teachers behind, we've got to pause, regroup, and move forward? But you know, it's the process I'm interested in there.
For me, the process for me was about credibility to begin with. Then it was about relationships. And then it was about collaboration in the sense of let's work together and see what happens. I don't feel I went into this work with an agenda. It morphed into a story. And we kept asking, okay, is this successful? How is it successful? What's working? What do we need to change? And why is it successful? And, you know, we're very honest with each other. And for me, that was the success. I don't know if we just sat down and said, right, we have to work together, we need to do something, we would have got what we've got at the end, because it was the culture. It was the culture of both schools, the interest, you know, the core purpose, everything is teaching and learning. How do we make that better? You know, we enjoy each other's company as well. It's sort of, I don't think it was one thing.
No, for me, it was just the impact of teaching and learning, taking good teaching and learning and seeing it at secondary school and seeing it at primary school has given me the confidence to realise and recognise when you've got a good teaching and learning model, it doesn't matter what context it is in.
No.
It makes for good teaching and learning wherever it is.
Yeah.
Has it been really enlightening for you, Amy, being, you know, I was previously secondary the same, and I love an opportunity in a through school where you actually see learning happening at different ages. And maybe what were the takeaways for you, or were you surprised by how well it did translate to?
I got really emotional, actually. I got really emotional tonight, Liz. I came and told you. When I saw the Whitmore model being used in a science lesson in year 3, and it was literally the non-negotiables were on there, everything, and it was being delivered to year 3 class, and I just thought, oh my gosh, this is just mind-blowing that a teacher here who was quite nervous would come up to us. She was really nervous, she'd lost her confidence, she didn't think she was good enough, she was honestly, there she was, stood with her back straight, she knew her stuff. Why? because she'd taken the model, she believed in the model, she understood what she was doing, because it was I do, we do, you do. She had a challenge on the board, she'd been coached, she had self-belief, she knew what she was doing, because that teacher and learning model had absolutely given her the confidence. There she was, there, stood there, teaching, knew what she was doing. And I thought, oh my goodness, where's this teacher come from? Wow, that's what teaching and learning is all about, and that's why I do the job that I do. And it just made me emotional, and that's when I knew that we needed to share what we were doing, because that's when I knew we were doing something special.
Yeah,
I really
because
did.
that teacher was able, like, as you said, stood up tall, had a pride in what she was doing. Yeah. She felt like this really resonated with her. And of course, we're all individuals, aren't we? And we have our own approaches. The warmth that we all bring to our relationships is very unique, isn't it? But I suppose what you've done is equip a common set of strategies, approaches that actually, regardless of your individual personality, these are tried and tested approaches that provide that scaffold, the safety net for teachers as well.
Sorry, there was a bit of a process as well, because after going to Whitmore and looking at live teaching there, and then the learning that went on to support that, all our staff were tasked with delivering a lesson using the template, and Amy and Kelly watched that lesson and then gave them bespoke feedback to focus on one or two things, and then 2 weeks later they came back. But you'd think, not everybody enjoys feedback, but both schools have got to a position, because of the culture, that feedback isn't because there's something wrong. Feedback is to make us a little bit better. So we've all bought into that culture, that philosophy. We all want to improve. And again, it's not because there's a problem, but we can just be a bit better, whether that's more efficient. But our staff really appreciated those detailed conversations about teaching and learning. So the lesson Amy was just talking about, the first lesson went well, but it was the conversation to, right, how do we refine this, that the second lesson she blossomed. And I think perhaps we don't have enough time or capacity in schools to do that, but that was huge for our teachers.
And that is interesting, Liz, because as you said, the time capacity, so often observations are linked to accountability. They're high stakes, aren't they? They happen, maybe once a term, or even, once in a year. So it's all riding on that. Whereas you've sort of normalized observing lessons in a way that's non-threatening, low stakes. So you've got the ability to take on board the feedback. How did you create the time and space to be able to do that? Because I think a lot of schools would love to be able to work outside of their own settings, to watch other teachers, to feedback, to discuss, to look at learning and think, wow, there was some really amazing, exceptional progress in that lesson. What was the teacher doing? What was the learner doing? But often some schools feel very constricted by timetabling, by budget, not being able to release staff. So what were the key enablers in you being able to do that?
I don't think there is a magic wand here. I really think that if you haven't got the capacity, it blocks your ability to think. But if you can think a bit creatively, if you can do things differently, it's definitely worth it. But I do feel schools struggle when there isn't any spare capacity in the school to cover or supply, or you don't have leadership available. It is hard work. So I'm going to acknowledge that is difficult for everyone.
We were able to do it because we at Whitmore really, really value Romilly, and so therefore Innes wanted to invest the time, and so therefore I had the time on my timetable and the capacity to go down, and it's part of my role to obviously invest in professional learning, and that's the reason why I was able to come down and do that.
Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting. You were talking about the model and talk about the template. Just for our listeners, when you talk about a template, do you mean a planning template, a consistent sort of medium or short-term planning template, or do you mean something specifically that is for the pupils? Could you just explain that a little bit for us?
So for us, it's not a planning. Well, it is a planning template in a loose form, but it's more the sequence of the learning.
Fine. And in terms of then that interrelationship between what we're teaching and how we're teaching it, and how does content feed into that? Do you is there anything that aids your staff's ability to plan within a particular sequence so that we know that learning is building on prior learning, and is that something that looks consistent in its approach across two schools, or do you plan in very different ways in Romilly and in Whitmore?
We haven't looked at each other's planning, so perhaps that's another podcast too.
It might well be, yes, to understand before you can get to that template of the teaching itself, wondering how staff are then deciding what those knowledge, skills and key understandings that you're trying to develop are before we then apply our teaching approaches. So that would be really interesting to see if there's any commonality, any similarities over how you build progression in then to that model. So obviously collaboration is always rewarding if you can find the time and space to do it, but it can be challenging also. You've found alignment between your two schools, and you've clearly worked with your staff to build this culture of respect and of staff feeling comfortable to be observed, to share feedback. Were there any key challenges in that? And perhaps then how do you look at that wider than your two schools, maybe across the cluster, or were other groups of schools? Because what strikes me from what you've talked about, and particularly from you, Liz, you were saying about I think it's the benefit of somebody external coming and providing that feedback and support that really helped you along your way to implementing and embedding this approach. So just wondering how you take that to other schools, so that others benefit from that input then.
I think one of the best things that would come out of collaboration is just primary schools and secondary schools talking with each other. And I don't think it needs to be anything bigger than that, really, because we are all doing the same job, but we think very differently about that job. And I think there's a lot of barriers that don't need to be there. And we need to respect each other a little bit more and just hear each other's stories and see how we can help each other. Because, the model we've done now will move on to something else. So in the next round, what we're going to be looking at is secondary teachers who perhaps want bespoke help in certain areas, and then we're going to facilitate that coaching at Romilly for them. So again, we didn't have that idea to begin with, but because we've spoken to each other, we've learned about the highs and lows of whichever primary school or secondary we're in, that'll be our next part of the journey. But for me, it would just be willing to talk and share it all. And historically, if you think about what transition looked like for year 6 going into year 7, it might have been a few visits to the school, or the secondary teachers coming down delivering some lessons, or even the cluster primaries doing the same sort of topic. But this is the first time I'm aware, and I'm probably wrong, I frequently am, of the focus has been on teaching and learning. Let's have a go at teaching in a similar style, so our children, when they leave us and transition to Whitmore, is familiar to them.
But I think this is true transition though, isn't it? And transition for teachers as well. So now they can talk to their pupils about what Whitmore is like and know what it's like to be up in a secondary school, because not many primary school teachers come to secondary school.
No. Oh, we've got another idea as well. We're really hoping our heads say yes. So this is live before they.
I know. We're going to have
they'll have to say yes.
They're going to have to. So primary school teachers are going to shadow like a head of department for the day. So they get to experience that, and then primary school and secondary school teachers are going to shadow a primary school teacher for the day. So spend the day in the life of. It'll be
And
quite
that's
good.
something that we've so missed. And I think, in fairness, Welsh Government policy has been trying to, with the whole curriculum for Wales, the 3 to 16 continuum, removing those disjointed breaks between year 6 and 7, even between year 2 and year 3. But it's hard. It's hard to do. It's time. It's costly, isn't it? And but definitely the opportunity to work across our settings and understand the so many ways that our roles are similar, but then also the nuances and how things do look differently, not just within a primary school, but within different phases of learning within that primary school. I think that opportunity to get teachers to spend time in each other's settings, it's just hugely transformative, isn't it? And I love that idea that you're talking about, that actually some of the primary staff see what it's like to be a head of department, and what some of the structures and maybe some of the constraints of secondary really feel like. I think what you said then as well, Liz, about historically, that's what I wanted to come to, is that historically, a lot of transition work has felt very top down. The secondary say to the primary, we need them to do X, Y, Z by this point, and it's not always built on collaborative, respectful, trustful relationship. It's been more of a diktat. And I think it's just trying to build the relationships in the first place. And clearly you have built strong relationships that have allowed you then that actually it is the secondary at the moment, isn't it? It's you, Amy, who's going to the primary and sharing your model, but not because you're dictating that this is how it has to be, but because there's been a shared understanding that this is an approach that would better serve our learners, so that they don't have that short, sharp shock when they get to year 7 and everything feels and looks differently, and they don't understand how their learning can be so different to what they experience in primary school. So I suppose it's just seeing how other schools actually take those opportunities, maybe, or I suppose before you can take the opportunity, you've got to recognise the opportunity there to spend time in each other's settings. But that does take capacity, doesn't it, to release staff. But there is certainly, this is an example, and we've got other examples across the region of where there's a will, there's a way, and collaboration doesn't have to be a one-way street, does it? And it shouldn't be. Transition work can be building from primary through. So I love the idea that your staff all learn from each other. That's really key. What about in terms of your self-evaluation telling you comes next? You alluded then, Liz, to your plans, and I know both your head teachers now have got to put into practice what you just said, because it's on record, and I love that as a plan. So yeah, what does self-evaluation tell you comes next?
At the moment, and we've had external, we had Eston in June, we did well, and then we've had external audits recently in February, and at the moment all of our class teachers are good or excellent. So the evaluation is the impact. It's been really successful what we've been doing. The aim was to be better, and we think we are a bit better, and we'll keep wanting to get better. So we're really happy to continue working together, but I think the model will be something a bit different.
Yeah, but definitely what you were saying there, that external sort of validation of what you're doing has been really important, has it, Liz? Yes. In the confidence for staff that you need. Yeah. You might have felt that internally that staff were happy with how things were, but having that kind of rubber stamp of somebody externally coming in and saying, yeah, we can say this is good or better. I mean, I'm quite interested, and we know that Eston are looking very much about what the impact of anything we do has on pupil progress. So what has been the impact on progress? In what ways are pupils progressing in their learning that maybe are improved from prior to this new teaching approach?
So I think if you were to ask the children, they would be able to articulate their progress. If you looked at their books, it would be clearly evident. Our children are far more independent in their learning, and I think not always, but their transferable skills are quicker and easier for them. So, it was always the case, you'd see this beautiful work in literacy, but would you see it in topic? That's definitely happened. Our data, we do have some areas we've got to work on. I'm sure all schools do, and we're using the data to shape our interventions and what to do, but there is definitely data showing progress. The books are showing it, the learning is showing it when we have our progress meetings with staff.
Can I jump in? One thing that I picked up on was through the coaching was challenge, because one thing that we're really keen on in Whitmore is challenging constantly. And in the Whitmore model, everything has to have a challenge on the PowerPoint. And when I came and coached both of the teachers, they didn't have challenge on their PowerPoint. And I asked them to put a challenge on. So when I did come and see them the second time, they both had challenge on their PowerPoints. And certainly through their question, they were far more challenging. So I saw a great jump in progress in their pupils challenging the pupils in the lessons and the type of question that they were using. So for me, there was massive progress in pupils' attainment in those 2 lessons that I saw.
Yeah, we recently invited our governors in to do a self-evaluation day where they took the SIP and they did a learning walk, book look, and then talked to learners. And again, we were all very comfortable with that I know they're ours, our governors are ours, but they're also external, but they were very welcome to come in and look at learning from nursery through to year 6, look at books again through, talk to learners, and then see some bespoke interventions going on. So,
and didn't you say Eston saw a difference when they observed with 5 and 6?
Yes, the pace of the learning was very quick.
And that's an interesting one, actually, isn't it? Because if you think about the way the majority of our secondaries are structured with, 5 or 6 1-hour lessons or 6 53-minute lessons, pace is something that, because you don't have those extended periods generally with learners, you've got to get into that recapping prior learning, into what is it that we're learning and developing understanding in today, and straight in. So that perhaps that does make sense that maybe some of that would improve. But I think it is so interesting to hear. I mean, we know key recommendations that come up time and time again with Eston at the moment are in developing independence in learners, having more challenge, higher expectations, and those are things that you're saying have sort of falling out of this approach to teaching and learning, because it's perhaps ensured that there are fewer gaps, because you're really spending the time through this structure, because it's very intentionally planned for the checking for understanding, the means, like you said, about questioning, those means to elicit the information of to what extent are all those individuals in this room really understanding this thing, this vocabulary, this knowledge, this concept. So that's a really interesting thing that's come out of this, that the structure that you've got in your teaching approach makes sure that fewer children maybe are left behind, because you're checking for understanding is there, isn't it, right throughout all of your lessons.
Yeah, definitely, I would say that. I noticed the difference, that the structure was really tight when I was observing. The teachers weren't fearful, because if you think about it, I was observing primary school teachers and I'm a secondary school teacher. That's quite scary, but they weren't worried at all, because that structure took away that fear. And we'd already given them some ideas as well of how to deliver that session, and they delivered, and it was just fantastic. It really was.
Oh, thank you. It really does sound absolutely lovely. So we'll sort of come to a close. I know you've both got busy days ahead of you, and all your children and young people are waiting for you. But what do you think, what excites you about moving forward, about what are your aspirations for learning, either in your individual schools or within your collaboration, or just wider for cluster or the learning in Wales? What would you like to see happen next? What are the things that get you excited about teaching?
I'd like to carry on working with Liz.
Yes, please.
I spend a life with Liz actually. Spend a day with Liz.
Oh, that's lovely.
I'm really excited about when we talk to staff and say, what is it that you need between our schools? We're going to be able to facilitate that.
Yeah.
And if we can't facilitate it, we'll put a message out there to say, can anybody help us with? And I think if we were all willing to say, we're struggling with this, could we have some help with that? I think that would be quite amazing. And I think we shouldn't cap ourselves that we go to primary. We need to go to both. Years and years ago, I used to deliver some training, and the best training was when there was primary and secondary in the room.
Yeah.
Because you just bounce your ideas and you think a bit differently. So
definitely.
Our engagement has meant that we've started thinking differently about education and trying to solve our own problems, or, ask questions. And I think something will emerge from our next round, and it'll be amazing.
Yeah, definitely.
That is so lovely. I mean, you're literally talking about the self-improvement system, is that schools are there supporting schools to improve, but through a low threat. It's not linked to high levels of accountability. You're able to just support in ways, like you said, you can be open and honest and say, these are our strengths, but these are the areas we want to work on, and who out there can support us with that. And that's superb. That's where the system's heading. And you've already made great strides in starting with that.
Yeah, but can I just say, to clarify that, I did grill Amy on her credential.
Oh my gosh.
Because I didn't want to send staff onto any form of training that hadn't been accredited. So part of why we did buy into this is because I know that Amy has the background to shape what we're doing. I would still, if somebody said they were doing something marvellous, I would want to see the evidence of who's told you you're marvellous and why, show me. So I bought into the package that Amy was offering.
I love that. I think that is a really good cautionary note, isn't it? There's lots of shiny, lovely things out there. It doesn't mean that it's the right shiny, lovely thing for your school or setting. We always say, and the same with CSC professional learning, you can come on professional learning, but the idea isn't that you go back and adopt, you adapt. And so you've got to have a level of criticality, haven't you? And that's, I think that's a healthy dose of that skepticism, just to know, well, find out a little bit more about where's the working, and there'll be things that you go and see practice in other schools, or you go to professional learning events and you think, no, that doesn't chime with me, and I don't feel that's strong enough sort of evidence base to adapt or adopt. But as you said, there was something, you did your homework, didn't you, Liz? on
I
Amy.
did.
Yes. You thought,
and I wouldn't interrogate her now, but at the time I didn't know her, and I was comfortable.
Thank you. Well, it's important. We've got to surround ourselves with people that we respect, who are credible, who have integrity, and that's part of what helped to build a foundation for your relationship, isn't it? So, yeah. Oh, thank you ever so much. Thank you for being with us today. And we look forward to seeing whatever the next iterations of your collaborations are, but certainly wish you well for the learners and staff of Romilly and Whitmore High School and Pencoedtre High School, as we do all the schools and staff and learners in Wales, because, whatever way we approach teaching and learning, what we want is the best outcomes for our children and young people, isn't it? And there's lots of different ways of achieving that, but it's certainly lovely to hear of your example. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Diolch am wrando ar y benod hon o Sgwrs. Cofiwch ein dilyn ar Twitter a Facebook, tanysgrifio ein sianel YouTube, ymuno yn cymunedau ar ein gwefan a darllen ein bwletin ysgolion wythnosol am y newyddion diweddaraf. Thanks for listening to this episode of Sgwrs. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook. subscribe to our YouTube channel, join our online communities via our website, and read our weekly school bulletin for the latest news. Hwyl am y tro. Bye for now.